Hello and welcome. I'm Kathleen McLean, Assistant Curator of Talks and Screenings at the AGO. Thanks for joining us for tonight's talk, which is titled Nightclubbing, a Toronto History. I'm going to have some introductory remarks and then we'll explain who all of these people are. But to start, whenever we gather in person or virtually, we begin by considering where we are and the responsibilities we have as either guests or hosts on this territory, and our responsibilities as treaty people. Toronto and the land the AGO is on is Mississauga-Noshabe territory, Mississauga. It's also governed by a treaty between the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Canadian government, and has been occupied by other Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat confederacies. So tonight's talk is held in conjunction with the exhibition Studio 54 Night Magic, which is opening soon at the AGO, as soon as we're able to open and safely welcome visitors back. We miss seeing all of you. The exhibition comes to the AGO from the Brooklyn Museum and features hundreds of objects, including photographs, films, sketches, and designer fashions. And we've done a few programs about Studio 54 Night Magic that focus on the club itself, and fashion, the era, and they're all on agos.ca if you want to watch or rewatch them. But the show also gives us the kind of amazing opportunity to think about nightclubs as spaces of social and creative transformation, not just in Manhattan, but here in Toronto. So we were really happy when Denise Benson accepted our invitation to convene a conversation around the topic. She's assembled a great group of people with deep connections to and historical knowledge of the Toronto club scene, and we're really grateful to have you all here. Two things before I introduce Denise. We might have time for questions towards the end of the talk, and you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window to ask them. And we are recording tonight's talk, and you can find it on our website after. Now, this is where the screen share magic begins. I hope it works. And I hope we're looking at an image of a baby Denise Benson, who is,
Denise.
yeah, right? Who is seen here with like gravity defying hair and what looks to me to be a Susie and the Benches t-shirt. So Denise is a writer, an award-winning club DJ, a researcher, host of Mental Chatter on Toronto CKLN radio from 87 to 2008. And the author of Then and Now, Toronto Nightlife History, which is both a book and website. Denise, thanks so much for doing this, for joining us. And I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce everyone. Thanks.
Right. Thanks for having me and us. I'm really excited to talk to these folks. So we'll get right to it. I'm going to introduce each of them and off the top, ask each of them the same couple of questions to kind of situate ourselves in relation to Toronto time period and music. So first up, Mr. Albert Assoon. Albert and his brothers, Tony, Michael, and David, they forever altered Toronto's nightscape with their Twilight Zone, a club that was, of course, unlicensed, after hours, incredibly influential, a music mecca that we're soon going to talk a fair bit about. But the Assoons have also owned and operated a number of influential spaces that helped evolve the city musically, culturally, and in community-wise in terms of clubs, such as Gotham, a bit more uptown, Fresh, which later became RPM, and a lot of people know it best as the Government. We'll talk a little bit about that history. The Assoons also had the Living Room, bringing house music back to the Richmond, Adelaide kind of area, and also Remix Lounge, which was on Dundas West until fairly recently, and also brought a lot of communities together. They now own the Mix 669 on College Street, which is a restaurant as well as an event space, at least when things can be happening again. You know, the other thing about Albert, or that a lot of people don't know, is he's DJ'd at pretty much all of these spaces, held down residencies, and is an amazing DJ. He's known as Fat Albert behind the turntables, and he plays disco, soul, freestyle, house, and a lot more stuff. We'll talk about music, but for now, Albert, to start with you, could you tell me quickly a little bit about where you actually grew up, when you started going out in Toronto, and what was your first favorite Toronto club?
Well, I guess everyone knows that I grew up in Brooklyn, maybe not everyone, but I grew up in Brooklyn until I was 16. formative years growing up in New York, kind of gave me different insight.
I'm sorry, Albert, I'm going to just stop you for 1 second and say that I'm having a very hard time hearing you. And I think from a note I saw come up in the chat, other people are as well. I think our AGO tech friend is still here to help us. Is there something we can do to increase Albert's volume?
Yes, I'll just chat with Albert on the back end while you continue to talk.
Okay, Albert, I'm going to come back to you. And it all kind of overlaps anyway. You and Mark kind of know each other, go back and have worked at some of the same places. So let me introduce Mark Oliver while we get your sound sorted. Zoom versus live and in person. It is what it is. Mark Oliver is, of course, one of Toronto's most beloved and best known DJs and producers. He began DJing in this city in '87, and he's never stopped. His list of residencies is longer than, well, my arm isn't that long, but you know, he held down weeklies at places like the Tasmanian Ballroom, 4th and 5th, Cameron House, Still Life, Go-Go, Club Max, and of course, the Government. He's also played a lot of after hours and warehouse parties, including being a resident at the legendary Cola. He had a big hand and a lot of big imported tunes involved in kickstarting Toronto's early rave scene. And he has a lot of stories about nightlife. Hopefully we'll get to hear a fair bit of them tonight. But before we get into your stories, Mark, could you tell us the same answers, or not the same answers, but the same question? Where did you grow up? When did you start going out in Toronto? And what was your first favorite club here?
So the same answer. I grew up in Brooklyn. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, I was born in Scotland, moved at a young age to Scarborough. Our family moved to Scarborough. And I just found out recently, I mean, I've known Albert for years, but his crew were a bit older than mine. And we actually lived a block away or a couple of blocks away on Washburn Way in Malvern. So, and I didn't know that until 2 weeks ago. So anyway, went to high school in Scarborough. And then when I was 18, I went back to Scotland and really got immersed in the club scene over there, and then came back to Toronto and tried to start things the way I'd experienced them back in mainly Edinburgh at the time. And the first club I went to in Toronto was when I was in high school. I went to Twilight Zone. Didn't know the Assoons, just ended up there by chance one Friday night. I had to sneak out of the house because my parents were pretty strict. So I was probably, I don't know, 15, 16 at the time. And yeah, it was actually a Friday night. So it was incredible. It was probably Don Cochran playing at the time, but it wasn't the experience that I'll talk about later, when the real Twilight Zone experience for me with house music, which was much later in the 80s.
Okay, thank you. And here we see a photo with someone that you met at Twilight Zone, a very fresh-faced Mark Oliver. Okay, Michele Geister, I'm going to go to you and then we'll come back to Albert if that's cool by you guys. Okay, I'm watching your faces. Michele was a pioneering force here in Toronto, documenting and sharing Canadian urban music and culture as producer, director, and co-creator of seminal MuchMusic programs, including Soul in the City and of course RapCity, both of them with original host and collaborator Michael Williams. And she also contributed to City TV's The New Music and Electric Circus, and we'll see an example a bit later on. Michele migrated to Jamaica to raise her family, and she's created television content there, including programs like Smile Jamaica, Island Dreams, and Vibes Cuisine. She's currently a member of Jamaica's first intentional off-grid community, the Source Farm and Eco Village, and is producing, directing content related to sustainable organic living. And her children, I think this is totally awesome as well, have also chosen artistic careers. Her son Ayatosh is a rising, respected, and really, really good, I have to say, personally, musician and producer, and her daughter Tafira is a budding filmmaker and actress. So that's a little bit of past to present with Michele. Michele, where did you grow up? When did you come to Toronto, and what club did you first go out to?
Hi, thank you for having me, and hello to everybody. People like Mark, who I know from way back in the day. I grew up in Kitchener-Waterloo, which is, you know, an hour from Toronto. And I was going to Toronto while I was in high school, mostly for live shows. After college, I moved with a bunch of my friends to this amazing 3-story house at Dundas and Sherbourne. And my memory, you'll have to bear with me, but I really think my first club experience, different than live shows, was I'm thinking probably as a Tasmanian ballroom.
All right, it comes full circle really quickly, not to mention your house parties.
Well, the house parties were legendary that we did have, because I felt we really were in the mecca of music, being just, 3 blocks from CKLN. Number of my roommates had shows there. And, even the early City TV was just a couple blocks the other way. So, yeah, but we did have legendary parties, and I had a lot of legendary parties elsewhere.
So we'll go back to a man who has thrown a few legendary parties in his day. Segue over to Albert. And I'm sorry, Albert, whatever you care to repeat of what you said earlier about where you grew up and when you came here. And of course, your first club experience, was it something other than something you did yourselves as brothers?
Some experience I can actually say was still when I was in New York, Manhattan at Electric Circus. I think that was the first nightclub that we opened up. That was my first ever nightclub experience. And that was pretty wild. It was just dark, a lot of in the dark art and light shows, using lights. Pretty wild, pretty cool, very hippie kind of scene. Playing lots of disco, early disco. From there, I guess Toronto, one of my favorite places, and this is very early, was Dinkles. I don't know if everyone heard of Dinkles, but that was in Yorkville. And I could say early day, that's where myself and my brother mostly hung out in Toronto. Mostly hung out in Yorkville. There was quite a lot happening there. It was Checkers, it was Clouds, it was quite a lot going on in Yorkville. A lot more. Foxtrot is another one that I connected with. So those days were in Toronto was actually quite exciting, and even the after hours going on was quite exciting. Like you mentioned, stages, the Tube. It was what they call After Midnight. It was Mrs. Knight's. Toronto was actually quite booming back then, and it sort of went dull, I guess, after the disco era. The 80s, it started to become boring. I guess a lot of restaurants sort of fashioned the same thing, did the same thing, everything became kind of redundant. And so, they had the big signs, disco sucks, and, everyone started condemning disco, and searching for a new sound, I guess, a new beat, and hence, we had, I guess, funk and rap, maybe funk's enabling rap, to start out with, Grandmaster Flash. And the explosion of the 80s itself, I think the music from around the world started to open up a little bit more in bigger cities, and more music was coming out from around the world. We started out in Twilight Zone, mostly playing a lot of funk, a lot of disco, and of course we were playing a lot of rap music at one point. It was rap. We were playing it as it came out, as we were getting it from the record group. So that rap, I think what happened with rap is that it eventually got big enough that it just cultured itself and whipped its way into its own format and its own new world. That's what I can say for now.
All right, well, we'll definitely throw a bunch more specific questions your way. I know that the AGO team is going to get in touch with you, Albert, directly, just to even try and improve on the sound already. I think every time when you lean in, that definitely helps, but they'll contact you for some tips, because we definitely want to hear not only more from you, but hear you better, because you've got a lot. You connect so much history, and you've created so much history and present day in the city that we definitely want to hear you the best we can. Albert touched on a little bit about that time period, late 70s, early 80s, Toronto, and how there was a lot of stuff happening. There were tons of discos. A lot of things were centered in and around Yonge Street. He mentioned Mrs. Knight's. There was early on the Cheetah. There was La Tube on St. Joseph. There was Heaven's Disco. That was the big one in the bottom of the Hudson's Bay Center. And of course, as we're moving through places, there is Stages. We're seeing an image from Stages, which was a gay bar that ran all night, unlicensed, if memory serves correctly, after hours, where a lot of people came together. The DJs there were absolutely amazing. And it was another place where, though it was gay, it had an open door policy. There was a lot of people playing new wave. Wally McDonald in particular started playing a lot of new wave there. Chris Shepherd actually had a hand in playing a little bit there. So a lot of crowds and communities came together at Stages. Amazing sound. And I know there was definitely some crowd crossover between Stages and Twilight Zone when that opened. I don't know, I didn't see, but another disco that was happening at the time that a lot of people went to, including a lot of Toronto tourists, was Sparkles atop the CN Tower. Sparkles was a bit more on the commercial end of things, but the DJs there dug deep as well. So all of that was kind of happening. And then you had alternative clubs happening, like, in fact, we just saw some images from Domino Club, and Domino was a bit more on the alt punk and post-punk side of things, a lot of artists congregating there, also late night, all night. It actually happened at one Isabella where there'd been a number of discos. And one of the things that amazes me about this time period, especially when you think about Toronto now and how difficult it is to get space, because space is money, incredibly so, is the number of places that were happening at that time that were not only happening at nighttime, after hours, but often unlicensed. And somehow managed to have enough money to not only run spaces, but run spaces for years and years, and huge spaces in Toronto. So it's kind of an exciting time period to think about in Toronto history. Not kind of, it is a very exciting time period to think of. It predates me. I forgot to mention off the top that I moved here from a small town called Grafton in '86 to go to Ryerson. Grew up going to high school in Coburg, but also, like Michelle, coming into town to go to concerts and events and to buy clothes and see what was happening, and just aching to get here and see, stepped into early clubs like Club Z, but my first favorite clubs were Nuts and Bolts and Domino, the Domino that opened after this one. So not the real Domino, according to the original people, the folks older than me who got to go to that one. But as I was saying, it's a very fertile time period, a lot of music scenes overlapping, crowds and communities coming together. But there was a need for a place like the Twilight Zone. So while all of this was happening, if we could go to the picture of the brothers Assoon and Michael Griffiths, they are wandering around looking for a spot after doing a lot of parties in Scarborough and other parts of the city, in buildings, discos, community centers, and they were looking to create their own spot. So Albert, can you pick up from here and tell us a little bit about why you guys were, that very day of the photo, scouring Richmond Street West in particular for a space?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can. If my face looks confused, read that as I can't hear Albert.
What I was saying that one of the things was that the bars closed early, right? So the parties seemed to finish too early, which kind of incited us to throw our own parties. And of course, when you have your own parties, they're more private. And you can serve alcohol a little bit later and go a little bit longer and things like that. So our parties, I guess, eventually became really successful. Right? We pretty much had a clientele already built up of 1,000. Looking forward to rec room halls in apartment buildings around the city. And so that's, I lost trend, and I was saying that you touched on the question again was, I forgot the question that you mentioned just now.
Well, you were down on Richmond Street, which at the time that you opened, Richmond was a completely different area. And as I mentioned, a lot of clubs were actually centered around or on streets near Yonge Street. What had you guys looking on Richmond specifically?
Right. So my point was is that leading from there, we're starting up our own after hours, right? One of the things, we got tired of having to rent equipment, having to, set up a light show and tear down afterwards and things like that. And we thought, well, we got to find a permanent space, and that's when we teamed up with some other friends originally, and started a team up, and formulated the team for the Twilight Zone, and actually opened up on an address that no longer exists, but did at the time was 666 King Street West. And we opened up there, and it was in the basement. And first couple of months, the dust from the ceiling kept coming down a lot from the base. So we complained about it to the landlord, but he didn't care. As well, if you don't like it, move out. And so we started pounding the sidewalk, myself, Michael, and it was a rainy day. It was kind of drizzling, and wound up on on Richmond Street. And Richmond at that time was like a manufacturing area. You can see all the factory workers come out like at a certain time, and at that time, I guess a lot of women that lost their husbands and stuff would dress in black and working at the factories and things, right? So it was different on Richmond. So those times was quite different. And we wound up there because we wanted to model after New York, having a venue in an area where we could make noise and not disturb anyone. And so that's why we wound up there. Pretty much everything was done by 3:30, 4 o'clock. Everyone's gone home, and the whole area became quiet. And so we could make as much noise as we wanted. And
now, you mentioned looking off the beaten path, a little inspired by some of the clubs in New York that were, of course, not in residential neighborhoods, and loud sound, being able to have some boom and sound. There is, of course, a strong, and in fact more than one, there's a number of Studio 54 Twilight Zone connections, including the sound system. Can you tell us a little bit about that sound system? Because a lot of people say the first time they walked into the zone and heard it, that was it, they were coming back.
Well, we didn't get the sound system until 1983. We had it installed, and we had put boards up in the windows to block any sound from going out. And I think people could actually, from that sound system, people could actually hear the bass from a few blocks away. And from the windows pounding and rattling against the boards rattling against the windows, you hear that little shattering noise from the bass every time.
You could hear it from Yonge Street.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll vouch for that.
Where is Twilight Zone? Let me just listen.
Wanted to remain underground, sort of a kind of a thing that they were doing in the New York scene as well. And so we were popular enough that when we advertised, we didn't have the address, but people would talk about it. They go, well, you get to Queen and Richmond, and you'd find it from there because you could hear the sound, right? So that's what a lot of people did. Believe it or not, they would just walk over to University and Richmond and just follow from there.
It was a Mr. Richard Long creation, was it not?
Yeah. So Richard, yeah, he did the original sound system for Studio 54, and then he did Studio 54 was, we know was a very iconic, famous nightclub where a lot of your fashionistas and stars went to, kind of thing, right? And was a very gay club as well. And then same pretty much for Paradise Garage, except Paradise Garage was a little more not so high fashion type of a place, but more underground, more get down and dirty kind of a place, right? More cabinets, more warehouse. And it was awesome because it was so huge, and the sound system was so big. The bass speakers was double the size of ours, right? And a lot of people they would have those doubled up, and some people would just hang out inside of the bass bins, right, during the night. It was sometimes you'd feel like you'd get vacuumed in the sound when certain effects and things like that. It was pretty amazing, pretty well sounding. And I went there mainly to check out the sound system because my brother Tony has been the one that was insisting that, we buy that sound system, right?
And it sounds like he had to insist pretty hard. And then at first you guys were not only nervous about spending, what was it, over $100 grand or something at that time?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So you spend the money, at first crowds aren't coming, and then people start to come in and hear the sound and kabam.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, just because we've got.
He was always preaching, he goes, if you spend the money, don't worry, you're gonna have a lineup, or you'll have a lineup, I promise you.
And it didn't hurt that you had, as we're seeing, fashion shows, many of them. You had live artists in, maybe later on you'll talk to us about Beastie Boys, who did some of the graffiti we just saw. We saw a picture earlier of your brother Tony. You and Tony were the original resident DJs. Don Cochran did Fridays, the UK alternative night on Friday nights, UK dance music. And of course, you and Tony on your Saturdays would have in a lot of different guests, including we saw David Morales earlier, but another 54 connection, a man that you had in a fair bit. If you want to tell us a little bit about Kenny Carpenter, who we actually saw in a photo with you at the start of our talk tonight.
Yeah, well, Kenny was actually recommended by Richard Long to break in the sound system, right? After it was installed, he goes, he's the perfect DJ for it, and you'll like how he plays and stuff like that, and highly recommended Kenny. So Kenny came up, and he came up with a couple of friends, and so they went around town and started meeting people and promoting and stuff like that themselves. That was Ron Holmes and Mike Joyner. And anyway, so Kenny came, and of course he rocked the night, and he liked the club so much. His crew liked the club so much. They actually liked Toronto so much because they've never been to anywhere else, and they came to Toronto. And I have to say, back then Toronto was like squeaky clean. It was very clean in comparison to anywhere like in the U.S., right? And so any visitors coming over from the U.S. were always amazed at how nice and friendly and how clean the city was. So and them also being gay, being black, and then meeting other people that were so open and friendly to them that they just fell in love with Toronto, right? And a couple of them didn't want to go back, but wound up having to go back. But Kenny, he played so good that we have to keep bringing him back again and again. Became favorite DJ Twilight Zone.
That's definitely one of the things that I moved here at the tail end of it. So I was there really caught the tail end and most of the alternative nights when I was going, but no matter what night you went on, and definitely as we, you know, I've talked to people about memories, everybody remarks on just how beyond mixed and accepting the Twilight Zone crowd was. I want to turn it over a little bit to Mark and Michele as well. A lot of people talk about the Zone. Of course, you guys played a lot of other sounds too, from funk to hip hop, freestyle, and so on. But a lot of people remember Zone as the first place they could consistently hear house music in Toronto. Michele and Mark, if you guys want to maybe give me a little bit extra, we'll start with you, Mark, a bit of a reflection of, you mentioned you went early and then you went years later and you completely fell in love with the Zone. What did you fall in love with?
So it was really the sound, the music, and it was just Richard Long designed the sound system to match the room. And he also, because there was nothing in that area, correct me if I'm wrong, Albert, but he was allowed to do things, maybe even have it louder than he could in New York, because in New York, he was dealing with, you know, a lot more residential areas in his installations. So anyway, for me, it was really the crowd, and it was the combination of all these factors. But the one DJ, or the two DJs that really stood out for me, okay, let's say 3, 4, Tony, Albert. I gotta say Tony and Albert.
Counting them as one?
Yeah. No, they're 2. That's why I said 3, 4.
Yeah.
In no particular order. And then David Morales and Frankie Knuckles, they just blew me away. I mean, I just sort of discovered house music. I was more into funk and soul, rare groove at the time. And in Edinburgh, that's the scene I was into with my friend Edward. And we came back here, we were looking to throw parties much the same way as Albert and his brothers and friends were looking to do stuff. We were looking around, you know, trying to do what we had experienced in Scotland. And you know, we were going to existing establishments. We did one at the Rex Hotel, but our sound system, we were renting, and the crappy sound systems, and we weren't great DJ, we weren't great mixers. We had great music, and then, you know, we were trying to work in a bit of house, but house to me just wasn't sounding, it didn't do it for me. Just listening to some of the early records, but then I went to Twilight Zone, and I'm like, okay, this is how it's supposed to be. I mean, you know, the intro is meant to be mixed over top of another track, and then, you know, mixing and using the crossfader and the EQing and the sound system. I mean, it would swirl around. I think originally the tweeter packs were borrowed from David Mancuso at the Loft, was probably an Alex Rosner kind of, and then Richard Long picked up on that, and all the clubs in New York had that cascading effect with the highs. This mixer here, is the Bozak, was actually used at Studio 54, and as you can see, there's no crossfader, and it's just all rotary. And, you know, these guys would be Larry Levan, Frankie Knuckles, Albert, Tony. They were just like working the mixer, really grinding it, and, you know, feeling it, like driving an F1 sports car, you know, a Formula One car, as opposed to, say, a Cadillac. So anyway, for me, Twilight Zone was just, you know, you would come up the stairs first, and also there was a bit of a door policy, I guess. You wanted the right crowd in there, but it wasn't like Studio 54, not that I was there, but you hear the stories, where people were kind of, the doormen were pretty cruel, I think, to a lot of people that were trying to get in. It was very exclusive, but it was very elitist as well. Twilight Zone was the opposite. It was very welcoming. It was still cool. It was still exclusive. You felt special when you gained that entrance, and you felt a part of something. But there was once you're inside, there was no attitude. Everyone got along. It was people came together, and that created a very special experience. It's where I met, in the picture there, Carla, and I met her at the top of the stairs just entering Twilight Zone one night, and she had these green eyes. They were color contacts, I found out later, but then, you know, with the lighting, they even just like, it was like lasers were popping out, and it was kind of like a love at first sight, like, whoa, I've been zapped kind of thing, you know. And then the music and the DJs working the music, not just the music, but the way it was played, David Morales and Frankie Knuckles.
You are giving me the perfect segue to turn to Michele, to ask her to firstly talk about her impressions of Twilight Zone, And then if you could also introduce a clip that you actually created for City TV, MuchMusic. Tell us a little bit about that after you tell us about what you felt about the zone.
Sure. I moved to Toronto in 1985, and I went to more alternative clubs. I kind of fibbed a bit with my memory, but I did go to alternative clubs first. Was DJing with my housemate Karen Young at the Tasmanian Ballroom, and then became aware of this after hours place, which was the Zone. So we'd haul our records home and then get ready for the next party time for us. Because essentially I'm a bass junkie. I just love bass, and going to the Zone for the first time and hearing that sound system just was incredible. I felt like I was in heaven. In about 1987, I believe, I met Julie Levine, who had her own house radio program, really just so knowledgeable about house music, and we became good friends. Ron Nelson introduced us and said, "You girls like music, I think you'll like each other." And she actually took me to the Zone and introduced me to Tony. And, you know, I was so inspired by her and the music that she educated me about, that I actually did a hour-long special on Soul in the City that talked about the Zone, featured Frankie Knuckles, David Duvall, and some of the other things that were happening. But for me as a producer, and I was documenting urban culture in a way, luckily that I was really blessed to be where I was and have this opportunity when it really wasn't happening yet at that time. And I think it's really cool that, you know, it survives on YouTube now. You know, people can find the house music special that we did, and you can see these glimpses of the Zone, which for me, it was just an incredible, almost like a ritualistic experience, going there, getting into your meditation on the dance floor. All the creativity was amazing. And, you know, if Susie Horton was there, rest in peace to her as well, you know, the dancers, it was just a phenomenal community. And the energy was so positive, and it was diverse too. I just love that kids would be coming in from the suburbs, and, you know, the downtown crowd were there, and we'd be mixing it up. It really was, I mean, I'm so sorry that there probably isn't anything like that anymore, you know, because it really was a special time.
Well, hopefully on the other side of COVID, there will be things like that.
I hope so.
Again,
I hope
it's
so.
different, but now, you know. So you've touched on something. You created a house music full feature for Soul in the City. We have a segment of it here focusing on house. We'll see a little Frankie Knuckles. We're going to be running very tight for time to talk about 80s and 90s in the next less than an hour than we have. So maybe we could roll about a minute of the clip, and this will give us a sense of Twilight Zone and the music, the working of the mixers that Mark was describing.
Are you a house music fan?
Oh, definitely.
What do you like about house music?
The beat.
What is it about house that you like?
Just the beat.
House is it.
All right, we get a good sense of it, and of course, the music still sounds fresh and amazing today. You know, we're on a picture now of Voodoo, and again, that whole time period, there was such a mishmash of music and scenes and crowds and people coming from all over the city, uptown, downtown, and art kids and punks and new wavers. And of course, DJ Siobhan did Wednesday nights Pariah for quite a while at the Zone. And there were so many other DJs who played there and so many performers. We could obviously spend the entire time talking about Twilight Zone. Voodoo was an after hours space on St. Joseph. It was also unlicensed, another one that managed to exist for quite a number of years. And of course, if we want to just go through the pics quickly at Voodoo, very fashionable place. And a place where, well, if you go to this next one here, as we're looking at this, you'll see not only did I want to look like Adam Ant, but a number of other people did at that time period.
Me too.
Yeah, up in the very corner there in the puffy shirt, that's a young Chris Shepherd, little known fact. Yeah, he hung hugely at Voodoo and actually DJ'd there. So you kind of have that scene. And I've heard from many people that when Voodoo closed, that whole crowd went over to Twilight Zone. Correct, Albert?
Actually, Donnie was bringing the crowd over before they closed. Donnie used to show up with maybe 30 people, 40 people at a time. He liked the Twilight Zone so much, wanted something different. So he would pull people from there, and then eventually he had 50, 60 people showing up with him every time, and he goes, how about you let me play my music, mate? So he goes, we've all enjoyed the funk and the disco and stuff, but let me play my music now. I can bring 50 people here consistently all the time, and this was very.
So that's all I had to do to get a gig at Twilight Zone.
Yeah. Pretty much.
I got that one wrong.
Well, again, that whole time period, there were so many after hours and so much overlapping of crowds, and DJs didn't have that hard a time. Apparently, some DJs going place to place and saying, "Hey, let me play." I also want to touch on while we're in the 80s, because there's also not only crossover with, of course, the alternative and new wave scenes and so on, but house music was taking off in Toronto. More broadly. So we had, warehouse parties beginning to happen, obviously booze cans and all that stuff, but some larger clubs also. So I'm curious to get a bit of a reflection. Community radio was big at that time. We had Ron Nelson with Fantastic Voyage. We had Dave Ahmad on CKLN as well with Dave's dance music. Michelle, you mentioned Julie Levine, and Street Sound started in the 80s covering dance music culture globally, originally based out of Toronto before it moved to New York. So we had a real scene happening here that I think a lot of people, until you start digging, you don't realize all the connections and all of the influences that, yes, we soaked in a lot of influences, but also put them out there. One club that a number of people have talked about, we're seeing a dance floor here at the Diamond. If we could go to the next photo as well. I think you guys will recognize the man in the middle, Mr. Jason Deco Steele. And he, of course, DJ'd the Wednesday nights there. Michelle, Mark, would either of you, excuse me, while I have some water, I'd like to pick up on the importance of Wednesday nights at the Diamond at that time.
Yeah, Michelle, would you agree? Wednesdays, you had every night of the week, you had maybe not
somewhere
every night,
to go.
Yeah, so Wednesdays it was Diamond, Sundays it was Copa, Saturday obviously Twilight Zone, but pre-drink at Tasmanian Ballroom.
Yep.
And it was a very close-knit kind of crowd. Always new people coming in and out, but there was the core crowd that kind of lived downtown. Not thousands of people like today lived in the downtown core. So you would flit around every night. There was somewhere to go, or maybe you'd end up at a booze can or somewhere with crap music, but you were still kind of going out to socialize.
And here we see the Toronto Sun in their style column of that time ran a feature on the Wednesday night because it was also a very fashionable crowd, very tied in. The first Fashion Cares event happened there. You mentioned, Mark, Sundays at the Copa. We've got some pictures taken by Julie Levine actually at the Copa, if we could roll that. So the Copa, Sunday nights, house music, but before that, alternative music, new wave, also funk and hip hop. And of course the Copa was a live club on Scollard Street. It seemed kind of uptown at the time, ironically.
I remember Gil Scott Heron playing there once. I think it was a Sunday night.
So many people.
Yeah.
Barry Harris was one of the main DJs on the Sundays for quite a while. Dave Ahmad played, so these photos are courtesy of Barry. I think we have a shot of him with Jimmy Somerville, as well as Bronski Beat. So you had all of that culture happening there. Another club I want to make quick mention of, one of my introductions to house and late night weird stuff happening, the lasers, the like, what is this, before I really understood the culture and started going to warehouse parties, was Club Z. Wandered in there one night and was like, what? And that was Charles Caboth's first place. Would either of you like to touch on, or any of you want to touch on Club Z on St. Joseph? Yet again, another unlicensed late night party space devoted to house music. Dino and Terry played there, Dave Ahmad played there, JC Sunshine, so many people.
Yeah, I was at Club Z once and I got chased out by a gang. It was 5 a.m, these like street kid gang. It was like they were carrying knives, I think. So like, but I think that was not typical, but it was always possible, you know, back then. That area could be dangerous at times, you know.
St. Joseph, yeah, again, Club Focus, we're going to see an image that ties together all those clubs in a sec, but yeah, that's some of the stories you hear about Focus as well, with the street gangs and the Untouchables and skaters and all that stuff. Yeah, Toronto there was a lot of room to walk around the city at night, to put it mildly. There really was. And RPM was actually one of those places. Before we jump to RPM, just want to take just a bit of a turn over to Queen Street. And as we're thinking 1980s, a place that has to be mentioned for the 80s, 90s and beyond, the Bamboo, for the live music and the DJ culture and hip hop, and of course the restaurant. Bamboo, I know you mentioned that, Michelle, that's one of the places you like to hang at.
It was somewhere I was coming, I was going for live music, and I did have some of my housemates worked there as well. Of course, they had amazing food. Club wise, I missed the whole Cube experience because I've lived away since that has happened. But I remember a phenomenal go-go show there. And I believe I saw Seal there. But I wasn't a regular, going there to dance. That wasn't that. I went there for live shows.
As did a lot of people.
But it really was the root of Queen Street, I think, in a lot of ways, the Bamboo, you know, rest in peace to the Bamboo as well. It really had a lot of influence. And I think we should even, you know, mention how important, you know, Toronto's West Indian culture was to the party scene. I really think that was significant. The West Indian culture celebrates music so highly and loves to get together. And I feel like they that had a that's one of the things that made Toronto so special, was the persons from the West Indian culture coming to party at, whether it was the Bamboo or the Zone or any of the other clubs where house was.
And you hear it in so much of the music that's come out of here, of pretty much any genre.
Yeah, just quickly, Michelle, there was a Sunday the last couple of years, Albert, you've probably been there, on the rooftop of that. It's no longer Bamboo, obviously, but same crowd, you know, Ted from Cola, Dave Campbell DJing, Carlos and the Hot Stepper guys promoting, and it's the same vibe on a Sunday afternoon there now. So it's good they're still carrying that torch. My favorite memory of the Bamboo was Gil Scott Heron, this full horn section, like just rocking the place. They showed up 3 hours late, I think, because of border problems, typical, but it was absolutely on fire. What a special night that was. Gil Scott Heron at the Bamboo, like, doesn't get better than that.
And they had a good sound too. It was a good live sound venue. You know, there's the venues that you cringe, that you're like, oh no, that show is going to be there because the sound isn't good. But the Bamboo really represented well in that way. Not like the Zone. Nobody could match the Zone.
I got booked to play at the Bamboo once, and it was after I'd been doing Cameron House for a few years. And I showed up with all my records, and they were like, where's Mark? I go, I'm Mark. And they're like, no, where's Mark Oliver? And like, I'm Mark Oliver. And they were kind of looking at me like, because they'd never made it in the back room of Cameron. They'd always been in the front. And they're just like, and they're like, oh, you thought I was black? Because they didn't want to say it. They're like, you thought I was black? I was like, I took it as the highest compliment I've ever, been given, you know. But it was, they really promoted Black music, and that was one of the great things about the Bamboo. I mean, they really pushed
reggae,
just
African,
great.
Latin,
Yeah.
And again, the food.
Well, the Cameron was so rammed on Wednesday nights, Mark, that it would be hard to find you. You know,
Yeah,
it took a lot to get back in the
it's,
back room there.
Yeah.
True, whether it was you or Malik.
And there was only one light
hosting.
bulb in the middle of the room.
That too.
So we're going to take another veer across the city and musically, and I want to ask Albert quickly. I'm very conscious of whether we're going to get to the 90s at all tonight, because there's so much to talk about between us. But when we head down to RPM, we see the infamous shuttle van, which I think that's something people have a hard time believing. Like once upon a time, a club seemed so far off the beaten path that they have to have a shuttle bus running, a van running from Union Station over to bring people over. There was a parking lot there. People could actually park right there. And RPM was a very different kind of place. Again, another place where different communities came together and different sounds, live music, DJs. And Albert, you had a bit of a hand in that. Before it was RPM, it was Fresh, run by the Assoons. And I think, if I remember correctly, you guys had a hand in working at RPM off the top when it first opened. Is that correct?
I mean, first of all, a lot of people thought we were crazy to go out there and, you know, try and open that, you know, the minute we started out with a 4,000 square foot space, which was what you would know as the drink in the government, and that was it was Fresh Restaurant, and but hindsight, we had already made a deal with the landlord to have that any extra space that would become available. That was fine print papers on the government side, and Ramset on the warehouse side. And fine print papers became available first. And so the minute I put a hole in the wall for people to kind of look down into, I think, you know, we were getting maybe regular 400 or 500 people attending. But then all of a sudden the lineup went up to 800-900 people showing up just so they can all come in and see this hole in the wall, to see the warehouse space, to see the future Fresh, what it would be like. And so that was an amazing time as well. And finally, you know, we got it built and got it opened, and I could tell you a lot of stories around that, so it'll take up a long time. But I mean, we opened up. I think we opened a few months after the Copa opened up, and we all of a sudden, I guess, all the promoters became attracted to Fresh and wanted to do their shows at Fresh. And of course, we had the Garys, who I guess was originally, who became Universal Music. But they had their bands booked at Copa, and they pulled out all their shows, and they did it at Fresh. And so there's a big history about that. I think you know a little bit about it, Denise, right? So don't really want to get into the deep details about that right now. But yeah, I think with you know, RPM, when it started, they started up with some of our shows we already had planned in, and of course with some of our staff and things like that. So that and moving forward from there, you know, going up to the government is when, you know, Charles bumped into me and told me his plans about taking it over, because at the time it had went insolvent and it was on the market, and he was looking at selling Ivory. He had Bel Air and he had Ivory. He was looking at selling that and going there and doing business there, and basically asked me, you know, he goes, I know your family started this and built it, and he goes, you know, I'd like you to hold my hand through it in the beginning. You know, he basically said he could offer me a year and a half contract with him, and to help him start up the government, right? And which is what happened. You know, We brainstormed, we hung out together, we went to clubs together, we went to New York together, went to Miami together. And pretty much in the hotel room, him and I shared, we came up with all the ideas for everything.
All right, well, the government opened in the 90s and we're trying real hard to get there. We have about another 18 minutes or so together and lots to talk about and a few questions to take. So I'm going to take us through a few pictures real quick and then bounce back a couple of questions to you guys. We're seeing a flyer here. I was talking about, and we've talked between us a lot about the connections between different clubs. So here you see even a DJ convention in '89. And when you look at the names on there, it's DJs from The Zone, from Focus, RPM, The Diamond, Nuts and Bolts, Boom Boom Room. So that kind of gives you a sense of, again, who was playing and traveling around and that the crowds were traveling around. Tasmanian Ballroom, if we head on over to it, a different thing altogether, except again, there was some crowd crossover, except Mark, you were talking about exclusivity. Without, we could talk about this a bit, but what was the door policy at the Taz?
There was not. That was the thing. It was just so random. I mean, a guy would pull up in a DeLorean, and it started at Crush before the Taz. Kingston Road in Maine. If anyone knows Toronto, I mean, there was a Dip and Sip Donuts. It's almost Scarborough, but Scarborough would have been a lot cooler. And it was just there was nothing there. It was an old biker bar that Johnny K had taken over, and then people were coming from all over the place, pulling up in Lamborghinis, DeLoreans, and not getting in. They'd be like, piss off, like, take a cab next time, you might have a better chance. And then some guy from the neighborhood would come in pajamas, like tripping on acid, and be like, right this way, sir. So it was very eclectic. And then it caught on like wildfire. So Tasmanian Ballroom, was the next spot. I mean, obviously Johnny wanted to open a few places, and he had an opportunity at the Tasmanian Ballroom. And that's where I met Michele and Karen, and we all, it was one big happy family. It was, I guess, when you hear the stories about Studio 54, it was very close to that in terms of the vibe. And the doormen were assholes most of the time, I think, from what I hear. I was never outside, but you would hear the stories. But a lot of times it was all in kind of fun. And if someone didn't get in one week, they'd come back the next week, get a haircut, change their outfit, and they might get in. So it was kind of, it was a bit of a game. But musically inside, it was like, it was the spot. I mean, Michele, you brought in Spoonie G, or I think you had something to do with it. Schoolie D. I mean, Schoolie D was, I think he'd maybe played here once before. So like there were some early hip hop shows. Michele and I started the first total acid house night in the city and probably the country. So there were a lot of, acid jazz nights too. We were playing acid jazz. This was 1987, well before Cameron House. Used to bring in a baby grand piano and have live jazz musicians. Mutadi came in Mutadi had a great after hours spot that people used to go and have a little drink, a bit of food, and great live music on the weekends. And yeah, it was just, it was a great spot. But the door policy was a bit of an issue for people only on Saturdays. On the Fridays, it was, if you were gay, you were in. Anyone was allowed in, it was like, and that was the real, that was a real game changer.
You can't call something rock and roll fag bar and try to be exclusive. I don't think anyway.
Yeah, it caused such a stink, when those ads came out.
Yeah.
And then Loose Moose came out with rock and roll breeder bar, and
yeah. And there you have it. that definitely tells us a little about the time. Now, Mark, you mentioned Schoolie D coming in, and we've touched a fair bit on hip hop and at least the music being played. And obviously, when we talk 1980s Toronto, we have to talk about the significance of hip hop here. And there were things happening around town. Dub Club was an early spot. Obviously, events at the Party Center that Ron Nelson and others were throwing. Ron's radio show, things that he would do eventually at the concert hall, community radio, block parties, and all that kind of stuff. If we can go next to a photo of Michele and Michael Williams. Michele, again, all of these things we could probably devote so much time to, but if you could give us a quick overview of the significance of soul in the city and then RapCity coming along, and not just coming along, but you guys pushing for it, and what that added not only to the city, but also this country and internationally, the scope of it. What did that do for hip hop music?
Well, I think Ron, through his program, really did a lot for hip hop in Toronto in terms of, exposing the culture and exposing new artists. But we were able to take it across the country and beyond with our programs. Soul in the City started as 1 hour a week. And if you think of a music station, music television, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we only had 1 hour for urban music in the beginning, which was Soul in the City. It repeated, it played 3 times, but that's still only 3 hours a week. When we started getting all the hip hop content coming, it was, fast and furious from America once they realized that we kind of were more diverse in our programming than maybe an MTV or a BET. And we actually, none other than Chuck D, complimented us for that. Our coverage of curating the music and the diversity that we had. So not only with what we were doing on Soul in the City, which led to RapCity, MuchMusic was a really, ahead of its time, very interactive in how we worked amongst other programs. So if I did something for my show, I would, go to the new music that was syndicated in 100 countries around the world and say, hey, we've got this really cool Cypress Hill interview or whatever it was we had. And they would also do something with our content. Additionally, Soul in the City was syndicated to Sky Channel in Europe. And I'm sure Mark knows what Sky Channel was. So that was quite exciting for us. But I think the programs really were there to, when there wasn't any mainstream exposure for the music in the beginning, we were there really pushing and even fighting for it, because there was a lot of that, to stand up for the music and let it be heard. And I listened to a Michele interview recently, and she really felt, City TV was the mecca for hip hop in Toronto because of all the things that came. The Electric Circus came. I can remember, trying to get all the club kids to go and be on the first Electric Circus, because I'm like, let's make this authentic and have the people.
You tried to get me on.
I probably did. I was begging everybody.
Twilight Zone, yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna ask to roll. We have a very very short clip to roll that I think a lot of people will remember. And for those who were there, you'll know the artist. For those who weren't there, look up Runt, who was an incredible street artist his work was at the Bamboo and all over the city. Let's roll this clip.
Funky.
So definitely Toronto being broadcast to the world via RapCity, and Michele was played a lot, and obviously Maestro Fresh West, and I remember Ghetto Concept, and so many people seeing them for the first time and hearing them on CKLN, and just all those connections being made. Again, we could talk for an entire hour, 2 hours, 5 hours about the influence of hip hop, rap music, and hip hop culture on Toronto specifically. We got a lot of ground to cover still, and we have 10 minutes or so. Zooming into from the late 80s into the 90s, if we can just kind of roll photos quickly in the background as I talk. A lot of the alternative clubs like Boom Boom Room, again, we had the emergence of gay nights. We had rock nights, gay nights, house nights, hip hop. This is me playing around that time. I played at the Boom. Lots of stuff happening there. Catch 22 was down on Adelaide. And of course, Catch 22, again, alternative culture. But also some of the early rave stuff was taking off there, thanks to Magic Mondays, Mary and Joan, and all that they were promoting there. I know that that was a place that Mark definitely went to. I spent a lot of time in. And then I know that if we left this conversation, and Mark, I did not ask you about 23 Hop, a lot of people would be like, come on.
Oh,
So,
yes.
yeah. So even if we don't get to talk about much more tonight about the 90s, as amazing as it was with everything happening from, Go-Go and Club Max and so on. Mark, can you tell us a little bit about the early rave days, breakbeat, really is before the word rave was used. What was happening at 23 Hop and around the city?
Well, I mean, I'll go back a little bit before that. I mean, Michele and I did an acid house night at Tasmanian Ballroom in 88, and it was exploding all over the UK at the time. I was down in Miami. Anyway, but Twilight Zone was really where it started musically. I mean, the first acid tracks that you heard anywhere were at Twilight Zone. Future, probably mid 80s, 84, 85. And that was really, I would play at the Tasmanian Ballroom as Michele did and Karen, and then go to Twilight Zone because we closed, 3, 4 o'clock. Go to Twilight Zone and just dance for hours. And Tony, Albert, whoever was playing, David Morales, I mean, by that time you were getting experimental, and it was acid house, techno some of the time. And you were just, that was the start of the rave music, in my opinion. It was the acid house and the techno from those days. And then, I was trying to get that going. We all kind of were, a lot of us at that time. And it wasn't really until 91 when at 2-3 Hop, where I just left Go-Go along for a year. And then Wes at the Hop said, hey, do you want to come play? I was there. There was no one in there. I just started playing hardcore and techno. And these guys just showed up one night, a gang of them from Brampton, and not like the gang at Club Z, but this was like a proper like raver gang, like peace and love, and they were raving, like they came in with whistles and they were jumping around, and it was like, okay, finally. And then that's when Neil, Dr. No, and Malik X and I and Sean L and the Exodus guys put together the Exodus raves, and the club had shut down, but we rented the space and we started to run these raves every week. And then Chemistry came along, and 92 was when it caught like wildfire. All the CFNY guys were in, Don Burns, Scott Turner, and Chris Shepard, and it really took off. Ian McPherson, and it was really, the rave scene was a combination of all these different scenes all sort of coming together. Although the older house crowd is a bit resistant at first.
Well, they're pretty separate scenes.
Yeah, but I think, but the music was very similar, and there was always a house room usually at a rave. But I think Twilight Zone would have been, if it had stayed open past 89, that would have been the real birthplace of raves in Toronto, because the music was already there, a Richard Long sound system, and they were bringing the hot DJs in. So it was all there. It would have been the Hacienda, like what the Hacienda was in the UK.
So in short, this conversation that we have 5 minutes remaining in, it all comes back to the zone. we could have called it that. Right? So thank you, Albert and Assoons and friends. We're going to go through here real quick. So looking at photos from the Hop, moving into photos from Go-Go. Mark, of course, played at White Room. So many people played at that club, and that was another space that was important in bringing house music and related sounds to larger crowds and bringing people back to the area. Club Max, as we moved from Go-Go into Club Max, Mark and many others played there. And you can look at this, Deadly Headley. Mark isn't on this one, but they're techno, industrial, all those connections being made. And then as we talk about the rave scene maturing in Toronto, and moving into a club, kind of a post-rave thing, of course, we got to touch on industry for a sec and what those guys brought down to King Street, again, at a time when that area was not really, not nearly what it is today in terms of population. We have photos from industry. It ran 96 to 2000, and its influence also, you feel the influence of it to this day. DJ Sneak, of course, the rave crowd, the house crowd. That's where I saw Ronnie Sizen represent one of my favorite concerts of all time. It was legendary, as the sign says. And then we have photos here from a couple other sort of, not necessarily smaller. Weave was smaller, right across from the AGO. Very community driven, and very, when you think about late 90s into the 2000s here in Toronto, there were a lot of spaces, some of which really had lasting impressions. that were community-based, and you had people like Chicks Dig It, Jungle Rama, the Milk Parties happening, basically the underground dance music scene. And then that also spilled over, the connections were made at Roxy Blue between, as we move, that's a dance floor at Milk Parties. Two of the men here behind Movement, one of the monthlies at Roxy Blue. Milk did parties, 52 Inc. did parties, of course Hot Stepper with their garage parties, and Bump and Hustle and all kinds of stuff happening there. So many parties. We had Junior Palmer, and we had Solid Garage, and here's 52 Inc. presenting Ursula Rucker and some amazing local wordsmiths. So we go from there very quickly over to Living Room, the Assoons, yet again bringing house music culture. Angel Norez recently passed, packed the room there. He was one of the founders behind Stereo in Montreal. We have a shot of Mr. Albert Assoon with the folks behind the longtime running resident DJs of Heart and Soul Sundays, which I know, Mark, you were actually an early resident of. We've got Andy Roberts and Ever Delicious Nicole with Albert. And then I just real quick want to move on over to, we've talked about the government a lot tonight, DJ Climax with Charles Caboose at the government. Climax did the Friday nights there for quite a while, like a huge, huge night there. Next up, we have Mr. Mark Oliver in a photo with Steve Dash, amazing sound designer. If we just move through these, Digweed playing to a crowd. We've got fellow government residents after this one, Manzone and Strong on one of the last January nights. I slipped into the 2000s to touch on government. And if we could run to the last shot, another one taken by Tobias Wang. This is a shot, of course, that we can end on this one. Mark, one thing you'd like to say about the government as the man who was the resident its entire time?
Well, not the first 2 months. It was actually Albert who I think told Charles, listen, you better get Mark in here if you want people to come in. And it was sort of the rave scene was, you know, aging a bit. There was a big few thousand ravers that were just tired of, you know, all ages, 15-year-old events. So it was just kind of like, okay, let's do this. And it became, you know, the rest is history, really.
All right. Well,
thanks, Albert.
Thanks, Albert. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Michelle. Before I let you go, I understand we may cut out suddenly. So I want to ask you before we go very quickly, what do you hope for in a post-COVID Toronto in terms of nightlife? What do you hope can be achieved or created here? Mark, I'll start with you.
I mean, I would love, with all the reflection and all, you know, the early days of house music, it was about breaking down barriers, whether it was racism, sexism, whatever. And we were really making progress there, you know, especially with the deep house and the message and the music, like Joe Smooth, Promised Land, CC Rogers, Someday. And we were, you know, apartheid was ending and it looked like, you know, the world was changing. And then it kind of seemed to kind of stagnate a bit. And I feel like that momentum has really picked up even more so now. And I hope we can continue with that when clubs do open again, and we can get that vibe back where everyone's coming together again instead of having little parties for each genre and each crowd, you know. Yeah. Instead of having it all splintered, I'd love to see everyone come back together, whether it's in a field where we're distanced or in a club where we have herd immunity and we can all do what we used to do then. Yeah. But the main thing is everyone coming together and celebrating together.
And new generations of people able to create their own scenes too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Michelle, Albert, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I just want to say ditto to what Mark said. I mean, my daughter is a young university student in Toronto, and I'm so disappointed that she, you know, not even COVID withstanding, you know, there hasn't been the same kind of scene that I really, you know, enjoyed and loved and have such fond memories of. So I do hope there's some creative ways that community, you know, gatherings can happen again, where music and diversity and just, you know, people get together. And, you know, music is essential to us, to humanity, you know, it really is. We need it. And it heals, it's medicine. And I hope that there will be ways that it happens again for people creatively in Toronto.
Albert, what would you like to add to that as someone who's created so much culture in the city?
I spent the last 6 years with, I guess, with alternative culture, and those people just love to dance. Like they live to dance, and they're 40, 45 plus, right? And they were coming to the venue and bringing their kids, actually, some of them, and just introducing them to the culture that they grew up in, dance, how they dance, and so forth. It was nice to see that, you know, actually looking futuristic in a sense that, okay, the old is out, but they're introducing it to the new as well, and it's something that, you know, will grow. And yeah, it was just going so nice. You know, I've actually had pleasure with just dealing with the mature clientele, and it was just, I mean, that's just COVID kind of just killed everything, and now it just kind of makes me, you know, it makes me a lot less in a way because I can't.
Albert, do you mind leaning in? We hear you better when you're leaning into your mic.
Sorry.
Thank you.
In a way because it's hard to be, you know, it's hard to predict anything at this point, you know. And you know, I have ambitions and dreams that I was hoping to maybe accomplish, but I'm just trying to picture everyone dancing with a mask on. It's a tough call because you know, there might be some things you can do with a mask on, but I think it's the whole freedom of breathing and, you know, jumping around and free. That just seems like it's lost now. You know, for something.
Well, I do think that outdoor spaces are going to be, we're all going to want to flock there as much as we can when it's safe to do so, and dance together, just to hear music together, to see people, to smile and have that connection, because we all know what that is, to be on a dance floor, inside, outside, wherever, to hear a tune, to feel a room go off and just feel connected. And as I said, you know, smiling at strangers, dancing with strangers, that whole vibe, wherever we can be and do that, I think we'll appreciate it next level.
Yeah, let's hope everything goes that way.
Yeah.
It will eventually. It has to.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah, it has to. So I did see that we had a lot of Q&A questions here that I apologize deeply that we haven't been able to answer questions. I know I had a quick look through and I know we answered some of them as we went through and talked about different scenes and sounds and talking about today's reality. I'm going to ask the AGO folks if there's any way we can get those questions sent over in written form and maybe try and answer some of those on Facebook or something. So we'll see if that can happen. Again, apologies for not being able to do that, but thank you so much. Between our guests here tonight, there's so much knowledge and history. We just scratched the surface. So thank you, Albert. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you to the AGO.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Albert. And thank you, Michelle. And AGO.
Thanks, everyone. And part two, maybe. I mean, thank you, Denise, for your series too. You really started all of this, all these memories coming back.
Well, you know, what's interesting is, thank you for saying that, it's people were ready to share them. And somebody from AGO is saying the requests for a podcast are abound. So maybe we should all connect on that and see what's up. But I've definitely seen with Then and Now and the interest in this discussion, people are certainly wanting not only to reminisce. It's not just about nostalgia. It's also about all of the collision of creativity that comes with nightlife. So I think there's so many reasons why people like to remember then and connect it to the now. And I'm grateful that we're able to do some of that for people. Albert, I think you're saying something.
Touch on, especially in the fashion industry. So, you know, yeah, we need a whole day.
Just to even list all the designers, let alone graphic designers and filmmakers, and whether you're thinking about hip hop or house music or rave culture, I mean, every one of those, there's so many independent artists doing so many different things that came out of these scenes and connected in them and created their own little businesses in relation to where they're going and found each other. And there's a lot of drawings we could make out of this, to say the least.
Keep it up. We should talk more about it.
We could. It feels a bit awkward, the Zoom thing, with not knowing if we're suddenly going to be cut off, or if Annie or anybody from AGO can tell us if we actually are able to take a question or two, or it is time to wrap. Okay, so we are in the right direction. So we'll continue with the thank yous, and thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch this. It is recorded, and we will be able to put it up so other people can enjoy it later. And thank you all again.
Thank you, Denise.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Blessings, guys.